Alright, hello again. We're going to be playing another chess video here in the rapid time control. So let's see, we're against a 1750 and we're moving up in ELO. We're almost getting up towards 1700 now. So e4, e5, another king pawn game. And it looks like another Ruy Lopez opening we got here. I've had a lot of Ruy Lopez games in this video so far, but we're continuing the main line here. Bishop a4, and we're expecting knight f6 and castles. Continuing the main line here. You have knight f6, castles. And then he has some options here. He can take, but b5, yeah, as an option. Obviously, we don't want to lose a bishop. Drop it back to b3. Then bishop e7. The main line, and we can play rook e1 here, defending this pawn. And then castles is a move. d6 is a move here. So we'll see what our opponent plays. So d6, and in this position, I mean, you have the options of playing h3 and you can play c3. I think the more like pure Ruy Lopez move here would be c3, because we will wait for him to castle and then we'll play h3 here. So we'll play c3. That's just kind of like a very standard, I guess, variation. And he plays bishop to g4 first, so now he can play h3 here. Putting the question on where the bishop wants to go here. And he can drop back to h5. Yeah, that's a pretty typical move we have here. And now we can continue our plan and play d4 here, which was prepared with c3. So if we calculate d4, takes, and this is guarded by our queen here. Yeah, so d4 looks like a pretty good move, freeing up also our other pieces to get into the game, our knight and our bishop here. d3 is kind of a more conservative move, but I like, if you've already set up the idea with c3, I like expanding kind of aggressively here in the Ruy Lopez, taking up the whole center. And he doesn't necessarily have to take back here. Let's see what our opponent does. He can castle, whereupon we may play bishop to, well, we'll see. We'll see. Bishop to e3. Obviously, we lose the connection with this pawn here. So we may play d5 and then go for this knight maneuver here over to g3. We could even play g4 here since his bishop has been placed here. If he castles, and start getting a kingside sort of attack here going. So he takes, we take back. That's the whole purpose of why we played c3, and that opens up another response we can give, another spot we can develop our knight to here. So he takes with a bishop. Obviously his idea is we'll take back with the queen and lose the pawn in the middle, but in this position we can take back with a knight, or with a pawn, excuse me. And we have kind of a weakened king side here, so we have to be careful about that. However, there's no way he can immediately exploit that with, let's say, getting his queen out. There's no real good spots for his knight to go to here. He could try putting his knight on h5, or h5 and getting his pieces in here, but his queen is now put there. So his queen comes to d7, targeting this pawn here. And let's see if there's ways we can deal with that here. Let me see. I'm tempted by the move e5, breaking apart the center because the black king is in the center. And after takes, we're proposing a queen trade and still guarding the piece with our rook here, the pawn. And if not, he'll have to move his knight. If he doesn't exchange there, then we can also move our pawn up, threaten to play e6 here, which is a pretty devastating threat in my mind here. So we'll play e5. We might be, let's see, we're sacrificing this pawn, but not really, because then we just take here with pretty devastating consequences. So we'll take on e5. I guess maybe I didn't have to play that so quickly. Maybe we had other options here. But in my mind, this is most like natural continuation we have here. And again, we're proposing a queen trade, so we won't be worried as much about black, I guess, having a checkmating attack on this side. Okay, and obviously we don't want to lose a pawn in the center here, so we'll take back with a bishop. And then this knight pretty much will have to move. Okay, so now we want to defend this pawn here because he played knight d7 there. So what are the ways we can do that? We can obviously play f4. We can play bishop to f4, developing a piece. And then there's not an immediate way that he can pile on more attackers here that I see, besides offering up a trade. So we could also play e6 is pretty interesting. And after, let's say, takes, get our rook up into the action here. Let's see. f4 also offers a spot for our bishop to be, our light squared bishop to be developed to. So I like it in that sense. But I think, yeah, I think f4 is decent here. Because we're looking to develop our bishop to the strong diagonal here. Yeah, I think we can play bishop to f3. And let's see what responses he has to that. I don't think, I mean, he can play knight to b8 here, adding another defender, but I think that's a step in like the backward direction for him, and it disconnects his rooks again. So I think by playing this move, we're I guess taking a lead in development here, and then it affords us a tempo to also develop our knight and start developing our other pieces off this back rank here. So I like this. I like bishop f3 because that's the only move that I see that will immediately. Okay. Is there threat to this move? He has the fork here, but if I take and he plays knight to c2, if we calculate back here, we're going to drop our bishop back, save it, while protecting his escape. Or let's see, what if he takes this rook? We'll take here, bishop back here, take, And then we're gonna, I think, trap his knight most likely here. So if he plays knight c2, and if not, let's see, we can play, if we play here, he can either take with a bishop and then fork. So let's see, we can play rook d1 here, skewering, I guess, both knights to each other, and then maybe he'll have to defend with the bishop or the pawn. And then we can maybe play bishop to e3 here. Or maybe bishop to e3 first, forcing the knight to come down, fork. We play rook to d1. But the problem is here that after this knight moves, let's calculate. Rook to d, bishop e3 here, and then the rook is still trapped. Let's see. Maybe we can play for rook to d1. And then if knight c2 we take. If something guards the knight here, we play knight out. So then this is no longer trapping the piece here. And then I think we'll be up material. And then we can look for better squares to attack with our knight here. But I think maybe we didn't play this too accurately after early on in the game, but we'll check later. We'll see. I have a feeling that maybe d4 wasn't the most accurate move on move 10. Maybe playing g4 earlier on would have been beneficial for white, but we saved it so far with tactics, and we'll see if we can keep these tactics up here. Notice if he plays this either of these knight checks, I believe we just move our king to attack his knight, and then his two pieces are still hanging. And at the worst case, we will have equal material here, actually. The worst case is that he traps our rook, and we probably will trap this knight somehow and win it back, and the material will still be even there somehow. I don't know. I don't see a continuation in which I wouldn't be able to keep this +2, but maybe there is that I'm not noticing. Maybe there is a continuation which black can somehow win back his exchange. Let's see. So this forks a pawn, but the thing is that we have this knight at the end of the fork. I guess the pawn is still defended by the bishop there, so I don't know what I'm saying here. Yeah, now we could even play, I'm not sure the best way in which to untrap this rook here. We could play knight to a3 now, since the bishop doesn't threaten. I don't think bishop e3 is the wisest, because the rook will be still trapped. Knight c3 I think looks promising as well, because if knight c2, then we can have this rook drop to b1. So I think knight c3 is probably the most simple and also a good spot to develop to anyway. And it looks like we're keeping material even here. And then if possible, we probably want our knight to be put on d6 here is a good spot, I would say, for our knight. And then eventually look to remove this knight from our fourth rank here, because this is our side of the board. Remember, one of the concepts is when you have a strong piece on your side of the board, I have no way of dislodging this knight with pawns. I would probably want to look to trade it for one of my pieces, for this bishop, for instance, because that's a strong piece versus my bishop, which is hardly even developed here. Not to mention we could be just winning material if he doesn't reinforce that knight somehow. But we'll see what our opponent plays here. But still, he still has 4 pieces to my 4 pieces. We're only up in exchange, so we still have to play this accurately, not blunder any like forks here in order to keep our advantage. All right, we have knight to b6. I think the idea here is to get his knight into a better square, which is not blocked by his own pieces, if that makes sense. So knight b6. Maybe he's looking to play like knight c4, getting it on my half of the board here. But I don't think I am too concerned with that move, because bishop e3, going with our original idea, if he plays knight c4, threatening this piece, we can play bishop takes, and if knight takes, we can play like something like rook d2 here, putting a tempo on his knight. So that doesn't really work out for him. Yeah, I think bishop e3 still works to knight c4. And if he plays something like rook to d8 defending the knight, then maybe we can play b3, stopping the idea of knight c4 here. And then look to get our own knight to d6. An important thing, we're guarding the square here. So his knight basically has no other avenue on which to develop towards our side of the board here. Alright, yeah, rook d8 as we expected. And now the continuations I'm seeing are that let's see. Let's calculate taking. I mean, he puts his pawn there and he gets a passed pawn, which is probably not to our advantage. Here we can play b3, restricting his knight from coming in to these squares, and he still can't go here unless I just take. I also see the move rook c1, just like getting our rook to a better square, because this fork here is defended. But the issue with that might be he plays b4, kicking my knight, and then is able to do this fork here. So let's see. Knight e4 isn't terrible, but it relinquishes control of this square here. So let's see. b3 might be like the most, but then he might be able to push c4 here. No, he can't push c4, he just loses the knight. So I like b3 as a move. Just restricting this knight a little bit. We're taking a tempo to just restrict this knight on b6 a little bit, so he can't come into c4. And if he comes into d5, he just gets taken here, and then we can move our other rook to c1. Or double stack our rooks here could be a long-term plan. Double stacking our rooks and adding more pressure onto the d4 square. And we could even maybe think about playing a quiet move like king g2, just stepping out of the way of like checks and guarding this f3 square. Because I don't see a way in which he can get pieces to attack down this side of the board. So g6, I'm noticing that it kind of weakens the dark squares around the king. So something like maybe we would want to have a knight on f6, for instance, if this bishop was somewhere where it's not guarding that square anymore. King g3 is a quiet move here. We have rook d2, I think, is kind of a straightforward way. But then we blunder this fork here. So king g2 is a way of, I guess, since he has no light squared bishop to punish us on the light squared with, is to defend this fork before we like double stack our rooks here. And I think we have time to execute this plan. I don't see any immediate threats that black has, so I think king g2 is a decent move, because as we move like towards this game getting more progressed here, we want to activate our king anyway towards the end game, and this will defend from this idea of forking us here after we play rook d2 and rook d1. So now I believe we can start with our plan of just accumulating pressure here. So yeah, rook d2, and then we can finally activate our last piece here off the a1 square by bringing our rook to d1. All right, he plays f5, which maybe he's hoping for en passant and opening up the board here. I actually think we don't have to do anything about this. I think it's a weakening move for black because now eventually we have a passed pawn here. So I don't think we should get distracted from our plan. I think we should still go for this double stack here on the D file and just accumulate this pressure here, because now he's going to have serious problems, I guess, reinforcing this square. I think he might have to abandon this file, and then we have ways in which we can simplify the game towards our advantage here, probably. Play knight to d5, perhaps, and after an exchange just dominate the d file here. You might have to abandon this file via like knight c6 or knight to e6 to avoid losing material here. Okay, we have b4 here, contesting our knight. Let's see. I don't think taking the knight works, because take, and our knight is still hanging. Or take. Yeah, I don't think taking works. And I don't think dropping back to, let's say, e2 works. Actually, it might. Let's see. Here, takes. Let's see. We have this, and then we have probably back to here. I think we will go for this. Just adding a final attacker here. And if take, since it's not a check here anymore, we'll double take on d8. So now I think this is just a blunder here, or losing material. Maybe he's looking to get in to here, but then we just have this fork here. So I think this works. And after like rook takes, then we're just dominating here because he can't move his knight. Yeah, takes, and then we just have pawn takes. And then do we want to take back with the rook or the pawn? He will go to, either way, he'll probably go to c8. So I think the rook is probably, in my mind, better, but maybe this, no, because it just drops the rook. And then we can maybe pin this bishop and look to get pigs on the 7th here. So I think at this point we have a winning advantage. And we're kind of, I mean, we're down to 3 minutes, but by this point we have such an advantage that it should be pretty easy to play the rest of this game here. And we can, even if I had to play it like a blitz game, it would be a winning advantage here. So I mean, he probably doesn't want to trade rooks, so probably go for the attempt to rook c8, whereupon we can just pin and defend our own second rank here with the other rook. If he goes, let's say rook to c2 check. So yeah, as we expected, and then we can defend with the other rook. Okay, let's calculate. If we go rook to a7, check here, takes. I think that's just winning. Probably. Are we worried about something along this? No, because then we just have mate, I think, on a8. So I think this is probably an avenue of winning. Because either, I mean, his bishop moves there, but then there's just this mate here. So that's GG to our opponent. Bishop goes back to d8, and then the classic Twin Towers mate here. And we can analyze that game and check our accuracy. I think probably pushing g4 early on and move 10 would have been maybe better, but yeah, game abandoned. Let's see what good old Magnus says here. 2 great, 12 best, 7 excellent. But we'll go game review, and it looks like now we're up to 1700 ELO, so that's pretty good. All right, I'm just going to check that. Yeah, we're still recording here. So we have about 92% accuracy versus his 80%, which is very good for Ruy Lopez game. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, A6, Bishop A4, Knight F6, Castles B5, Bishop B3, Bishop E7 is all following the main line, shall we say, the Ruy Lopez response is Rook E1. We have D6, which signals to us that the opponent is not going for the martial attack. And hopefully we can cover the martial attack in a different video. I mean, the martial attack is its own beast. And I would say when a Ruy Lopez player sees that they're going for the martial attack, which would be signaled by castling And then let's say if you went for like c3, like how you classically play this Ruy Lopez, d5 should basically like, you should see this. I mean, it's a pawn sacrifice, takes, but you should see this, and this should make you like shit your pants pretty much, because I mean, I'll just play it out for you real quick, but takes, and then knight takes, and then I think the response here is, the modern response is c6, d4, bishop d6, rook e1, and then like queen to h4, I think. And this should like be frightening to any player playing the Ruy Lopez, because look at all white's pieces on the back rank here, and then we actually have like a significant counter attack from the black pieces on white here. So a lot of practical players would not prefer to go into this line. Instead of playing c3, they would play something like a4. But we can delve into that in another video. Yeah, I've lost, I think, many times to the martial attack, and that is its own whole own beast. But our opponent does not go for that. He goes for like a more like systematic, I guess, approach with d6, which of course the idea is to put their bishop on g4 here. We play c3 because a lot of times the better move for black is the castle before going bishop g4. So c3 is also a book move, bishop g4, and h3 is probably, yeah, our last book move after bishop h5. d4 is solid, but probably, I mean, more book would be to play g4. We'll see. d3, g4, a4, a3, queen e2 is what Stockfish is all saying. But yeah, d3 probably less ambitious and more of a solid approach. But I like playing, you know, the d4 move a lot in a lot of Ruy Lopez systems. So we play d4. Taking is a mistake, yeah, because it just basically allows white to gain the big center here without much compensation. And the I mean, it looks like maybe this is a goofy like opening of the king side for white, but the thing is, where's the follow-up for black? You have no pieces over here to actually like follow up on the fact that you've opened the G file. Your queen can't get over there. Your knight has basically no spots to advance. I mean, you could try like h5, but then it's taken you like 4 moves to get your queen over there. So he tried the attempt queen d7, which is probably like the most like good follow-up to try to get your queen immediately onto the king side here. And I guess e5 was a mistake by my part. Let's see. The best move, it's probably, let's see what the computer says is the best move after queen to d7. Maybe it's just defending it with a king. Yeah, king h2, king g2. And then the black pieces have basically nowhere to follow. King h2, I mean, yeah, he could maybe try to get his bishop into the attack, but Stockfish says, yeah, no way you're actually following up on this. But we play e5. D takes. E is how our opponent responded, which is a great move. D takes. Queen takes. Yeah, probably a mistake, because now you can't follow up on the fact that all of white's pieces are kind of, or white's king side, I should say, is weak. You can't really checkmate as black without your queen still on the board. So now we take with a bishop, of course, because we want to keep protecting this pawn. And then the knight drops back in order to try to challenge that pawn. We defend it with f4, and then castling says a mistake, just because of this monstrous threat of bishop f3. I guess he just missed that. Bishop f3, knight moves, we take the rook, and rook to d1, great move. Skewering the knights together, he has to add a defender, and then we can play knight c3, getting a spot for our rook to escape. Bishop e3, b3 is excellent, restricting his knight. King g2, and then we slowly continue our plan with rook d2 here. And f4, we continue rook a d1. And then our knight just drops back, adding another attacker. And I thought he would probably take, allowing the double capture on d8, but this kind of just makes our job easier with knight to d5 here. Takes, and then the big exchange on d4, and then rooks get on the 7th rank here. And a key thing to note about a lot of the endgames here where you have 2 rooks is that their most powerful placement is on the 7th rank here, even, let's say, at the cost of sacrificing a pawn. A lot of times it's still worth it to sacrifice that pawn anyway and get your rooks to the 7th rank, because there's, again, so many threats that are easy to miss of like just checkmate on the back rank here, which our opponent obviously missed. After bishop d8, we just checkmate here. So that was a pretty good Ruy Lopez game. Let's go, I guess, kind of, if we can, into the opening here. So analyze the opening. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castling, b5, bishop b3, bishop e7. And the point of bishop e7 is you're now actually threatening to take on e4, because after the rook arrives on e1, you can move your knight back, and this pin on the pawn here will be less substantive when you have another piece, I guess, in between your king and the pawn there. So the point is you're actually threatening this pawn on e4, and this is known in a lot of Ruy Lopez books, obviously, is this setup here is like the entry point, the main line into a lot of different Ruy Lopez systems that black and white can play. I mean, this is like a modern way of continuing the Ruy Lopez. So d6 is probably the most like flexible option for black. Castling kind of signals that most of the time they want to go into the martial attack that I mentioned earlier. But d6 often signals that, okay, we're going to spend a tempo defending, adding an additional defender. So this piece opening up the bishop here and preparing to castle on the next move is usually what that signals. So c3 is the most like challenging, I guess, response to that. It says, okay, white's intentions here are that we're going to put the pawn in the center and get the big center here. And then castling is the move I've seen most of the time in the book variations of this line, but bishop g4 is another book move, obviously. I mean, it's obviously clear you want to play d6 and then to open up the bishop, so it's just kind of a different move order here. And then h3, we push the bishop back, and then I guess I was the first one to go away from the book variations here and play d4, which is not a bad move. I mean, it's basically set up with c3 already. But after bishop takes, we get kind of that weakening on the king side that may be kind of hard to play. So in this variation where black immediately puts the bishop before castling, it's probably wiser, and Stockfish agrees with that, to play d3 here to just maintain this solid like setup in the center. After knight a5, yeah, we can drop our bishop back to c2, and after like c5, we can probably continue with like the Ruy Lopez plan of knight bd2, knight f1, and knight g3. Yeah, is what the Stockfish is recommending here. And this is kind of like a very classical way, I guess, of classic plan in a lot of Ruy Lopez positions, is you want to reroute the knight via this way over here. So let's say castles, then you're going to reroute your knight to f1, and then eventually land on g3 after, let's say, like, what does Stockfish say, like rook e8. You could even play like g4 and knight g3 here, trying to like just throw everything down the king side. That's like, I think Kasparov had a game kind of like that, where he threw in the move g4 and just eventually ended up mating the black king there. But knight g3 is probably most solid there, just keeping the pawn structure solid around your king. After like bishop g6, the idea is to get eventually a knight to f5, and maybe play d4 and just have like an attack going with all your pieces, I guess, pointing to the king side. That's the whole idea of the Ruy Lopez we have here. So that's some plans you have as white in the Ruy Lopez. Our game kind of deviated from that. We kind of went into d4 early on, and after the weakening, we still were able to outsmart our opponent tactically, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it was kind of instructive on some plans that white has in the Ruy Lopez.